Enroll your child for the manifested e-learning platform and see their grades grow tremendously. These videos can be downloaded to a laptop for offline viewing or viewed from a smartphone in a cost-friendly format.
Welcome to Manifested e-learning, and today we are going to have a lesson in history and government. We are going to have a lesson in history and government. We are going to have a lesson in history and government. And today's lesson, we are going to look at, we are going to have a continuation of the topic that we started, which is introduction. Introduction to history and government. Introduction to history and government. That is the topic that we are going to look at. Introduction to history and government. So, my dear learner, our objectives for this lesson. 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 Number one, you should be able to, by the end of this lesson, you should be able to by the end of the lesson, by the end of the lesson, learner should be able to, number one, name or identify the periods in history. Two, you should be able to explain the three branches of history. And then number four, you should be able to discuss the arms and forms of government. The arms and forms of government. So, by the end of this lesson, my dear learner, you should be able to, number one, identify the periods in history, and then number two, explain the three branches of history, and then number three, you should be able to discuss the arms and forms of government. So, my dear learner, as we learned in our previous lesson, we defined what history is. We also defined what government is. So, my dear learner, can you be able to remember what definition we gave for these two terms, history and government? Can you be able? Try to tell your friend. Try to tell him you are having a brother or your mom. Can you tell them what is history and what is government? Yes, we said history is a discipline that studies man's past events in a chronological order. That is history. And we also defined government as a group of people who have been given power to exercise control over the affairs of a given nation, state, or a country. And they are given this power by the people of that specific country. So, my dear learners, today I want us to look at the periods in history. what are the periods in history? Which are the periods in history? So history, I also explained in our previous lesson that history is an account of past events. We can also say history is an account of past events. So when we talk of history, there are two periods or two timelines in history. There are two periods in history. So the first one, we refer to it as prehistory. Prehistory. And then number two, we have history. So history can be divided into two periods, what we call prehistory and then what we refer to as history. So my dear learners, what do you think is the term prehistory, or what does prehistory mean? So when you talk of prehistory, it is the period in man's activities where writing as a way of storing information was not invented. That is prehistory. The period where man's activities were not recorded down, were not written down. So when you talk of prehistory, we are talking of activities of man before writing was invented. It is the activities of man before writing was invented as a way of storing information. That is what we refer to as prehistory. So if somebody was to ask you what is prehistory, you have to tell them it is a period when man's activities, or when man was existing without having to write down whatever they are doing. That is the period of prehistory. So when we talk of history, it is the period where information is written down or stored in another form, or stored in a where you can find, you can be able to read, you can be able to hear, you can be able to see. So that is when we call history. History happens to be the recent events. It involves recent events. So these are events in human activities that have been written down or have been recorded down in one form or another. There is recording. It is the period when writing has been invented. So you might ask yourself, so in this period of prehistory, because we have divided the periods in history into two, the prehistory and history, how are people storing their information? Because they have to keep information for their communities, for their families. How are they keeping information? They were doing this through songs. They were doing this through poems. They were doing this through their own language. The language of the people stored the information about them. They were doing that through what? The different plays they had. You could find young children playing around, singing or having dances. That was a way of storing information. So that information was passed from one generation to the other through their interactions. They could talk, they could continually chant, like for example, prayers or the activities of the community. They were passed from one generation to the other. That was the period in prehistory. So for us to get information on prehistory, we have to focus on what were the songs, what was the language of these people, what were they doing, what have they been doing from the time they existed to today. But in this, when you talk of history, we just have to go down, look at what has been scribbled down, look at what has been recorded. For example, today we talk of radios, we have flash disks. That is recent history. It is recorded down in one form or another. So that is all about periods in history. So let us move further, my dear learner, and look at the branches. The branches or aspects of history. Which are the branches or aspects of history? So when we talk of history, we said history is an account of past months' events. So what are the branches of history? So history can be divided into three branches. It has three branches. Which are these three branches? Number one, we have economic history. Number two, we have political history. And then number three, we have social history. Social history. So my dear learners, history can be divided into three aspects or into three branches: economic history, political history, and social history. So my dear learner, we can go together. History can be divided into how many branches? Three branches. That is number one, economic history. Number two, political history. And then number three, social history. So when you talk of, we have to talk of economic, political, and social history. So let us just give what do these things or what do these terms mean? When you talk of economic history, so let us start with number one, economic history. So when you talk of economic history, what does that mean? So when you talk of economic history, it means or it deals with a people's livelihood. It deals with people's livelihood. People's livelihood. What do a certain people do on their day-to-day life? What do they do to sustain their life? What do they do to make sure that they continue existing into this world? So when you talk of a people's livelihood, there are different things that people do to make sure that their life continues. For example, what you could ask yourself, what does your parents do to make sure that you have food in your house, you are able to go to school, you are able to have nice clothing, you are able to have a place to sleep, you have shelter. What do your parents do to make sure your life is comfortable? What do your parents do? Yes, I know you know, maybe they are teachers somewhere, maybe they are lawyers, maybe they are businessmen. Now, that is what we call the livelihood of a person. So, economic history measures on the livelihood of people, the things they do on their daily life to make sure that they have their basic necessities of life. That is a people livelihood. So in economic history, we study what are these activities. And what are these activities? We can be able to give examples, right? Yes, we can be able to give examples. So what do people do to make sure that they have a livelihood? So you can talk of trade. You can talk of trade. Yes, you engage in businesses, right? You run shops. There are people who have barber shops, right? They provide a service. That is trade. Yes, you can talk of farming. You can talk of farming. People engaging in agriculture, rearing of livestock, right? Rearing of birds or chicken, what we call as poultry, right? You can, what other form of farming, right? You have zero grazing of animals, right? You have people who rear beef animals, that is farming, right? And then we have industry. We have industry. When you talk of industry, you might have, that is production of physical goods. That is industry. You produce a physical good that can be seen. For example, the pen I'm having here, it is produced in an industry. So somebody produces this board marker and then sells it to me, a teacher. So when I go and buy it, that person earns a livelihood, right? So that person's livelihood is production of whiteboard markers. The clothes you are having, it is somebody who has produced that. We call that textile industry. Even in traditional societies, there was what we called weaving. That is making of baskets, making of different items in the house that were used by the women. For example, the shawls they could cover themselves with, they used to weave, right? Yes, there was also on industry, there was pottery, making of pots. That is in traditional society, making of pots. Today, we do not use the traditional pots. We have what? We have electric cookers, we have electric kettles. Those are items that are produced in an industry. Can you mention another activity that people engage in for their own livelihood? Yes. You can also mention fishing. Fishing is another way in which people find or maintain their livelihood. So in a nutshell, my dear learner, when you talk of economic history, it is or it engages those activities that people engage in to maintain their livelihood or to maintain their life. That is economic history. So let us move further. Go to the next branch. And what was the next branch? Political history. So let us look at that branch. Political history. Political history. So my dear learner, when you talk of political history, it has to do with leadership. It has to do with leadership. Politics has to do with leadership and ruling. Ruling. How is power exercised within a given group of people? So political history deals with how control or power is exercised in that given people who are being studied. That is political history. So it has to do with how do people, what are the rules and regulations that govern that group of people that are being studied at that time. So it has to do with leadership and rulership. How do people exercise control? Is everybody involved in making decisions? Or do we have a specific person who makes decisions on behalf of the group? Or the group comes together to make a decision on what they are going to do. That is what we call or we refer to as political history. In some communities, we only have men leading, right? In other communities, you will find both men and women are given a chance to exercise control. In some other communities, you find people have to elect their leaders. In other communities, you are born a leader. For example, if your family, you are leaders, your father was a leader, you find in some communities, if you are the eldest son, you automatically become the heir of that office of leadership. That is what political history deals with. It deals with studying what are the systems of control in a society or in that group of people who are being studied. And then the last aspect or the last branch of history, my dear learner, what was it? Social history. Yes, very good. Social history. So when you talk of social history or when you talk of socialism, it is interaction. There has to be interaction. How do people interact with one another? How do people, what are the things that guide a person's behavior? What are the belief systems of a people? So when you talk of social, we talk of values, we talk of beliefs, yes, we talk of traditions, right? We talk of customs. Talk of customs. So the social history, the social aspect of history deals with a people's system of values. Doing something is good. Doing the other thing is not good. Right? We believe this is where we came from. This is what we do in this society. Right? These are our activities. These are our beliefs. That is to do with social history. So a historian will be able to specifically study the social aspect of a given people. What do these people believe in? What makes them behave the way they behave or do what they do? For example, in our Kenyan situation, we have different communities, so many communities. Each community is different from the other in terms of their social aspect, how they view the world, how they interact with other people, a person to person. So that is what social history will deal with. The values, the beliefs, the traditions, or the customs of a specific group of people. So my dear learners, today we have learned this, the branches and aspects of history. We have mentioned economic history, political history, and social history. So let us now go to our last aspect that we are going to look at in our lesson today, the arms and forms of government. The arms. Look at the arms of government. The arms of government. The arms of government. So what are these arms of government? So we said a government is a group of people who have been given power to do what? To control the affairs of a given state or country. And these powers is derived from the people of that country. So a government to operate needs different arms, or it has different organs to help it exercise its control. So the government has three arms. The government has three arms. Has three arms, which are also referred to as organs. Three arms. The first one, we have the legislature. Then number two, we have the executive. And then number three, we have the judiciary. The judiciary. These are the arms of government. The legislature. Let's start with the legislature. What is the legislature? It is the law-making arm. It is the law-making arm of the government. So this arm is specifically concerned with making rules and regulations of the government, right? That is the legislature. In Kenya, our legislature, we have a bicameral legislature. We have the National Assembly and we have the Senate. And then in the county governments, we have the county assemblies. So that is the law-making arm of the government. It is known as the legislature. And then we have the executive. It is the arm concerned with implementation of the law. Now, the judiciary, on the other hand, is tasked with the responsibility of interpretation of the law. So the judiciary is concerned with bringing a consensus in case the law is not being interpreted well or there is a problem. It is the judiciary that comes to give a way or give the correct way of following the law. So those are the three arms of the government. And then lastly, my dear learners, let us look at the forms of government. And I want you to note very well, there is a difference between the arms and the forms. The forms of government. The forms of government. So we only have 4 different forms of government that we are going to look at. The first one, we call it the aristocratic government. And then number 2, we have monarchical government. We have monarchical government. Number 3, we have a democratic government. And then number 4, which is the last one, we have a dictatorial kind of or form of government. So my dear learner, I want you to note the difference here. Most learners make a mistake here. They think the arms are the same as the forms. The arms are the organs that compose a government. But now the type or the form, right? So a form can also be referred to as the type of government. So we have 4 forms of government. The first one is aristocratic government. We have a monarchical government. We have a democratic government. And lastly, we have a dictatorial government. So let us just give a brief explanation of what an aristocratic government is. In an aristocratic government, my dear learner, it is where we have a specific group of people. We have a specific group of people who exercise power. They are from normally a royal class. So we have a royal class who lead. So if you are not from this royal class, you cannot be able to be part of the government. That is an aristocratic government. In a monarchy, we have inheritance. We have inheritance. And a monarchy can be divided into 2. We have an absolute monarchy, and we have a constitutional monarchy. So in monarchical government, we have kingdoms. So we have the head, who is a king, or we have a queen, if is a lady, in kingdoms. So in an absolute monarchy, the head, who is the king or the queen, has absolute powers over the nation. But in a constitutional monarchy, the powers of the king or queen is restricted by a constitution. A good example of a constitutional monarchy is of a constitutional monarchy is the country of Britain, right? We have the queen, but also we have we have a government that is controlled by the constitution. The powers of the queen are restricted by the constitution. Now, when you talk of a democracy, it's where people are engaged in electing. In these two, people do not elect, right? In the first one, you have to be from the loyal class for you to engage in leadership. In kingdoms, we only have the head being from a specific place, but some other people can be elected or appointed to lead. But now, when you talk of a democracy, we have people appointing. People appoint their leaders. People appoint their leaders. That is a democracy. Now, we have the last example of or form of government, a dictatorial government. We have the leader is the law. The leader who is leading the government, the leader is the law. The person who is in leadership or is in power says it all. Whatever he says becomes law. We have had different examples of dictators in the world. An example, can you mention an example of a dictator in the world? We had Adolf Hitler of Germany. We had Mussolini of Italy. And even in Uganda, it said Idi Amin was a dictator, because whatever the leader desired became what was implemented on the people. The people did not have any say. In a democratic government, the people's ideas or ideals are respected. Whatever they want, it is what it is followed to the latter. They elect leaders or representatives to represent them. So, my dear learner, as we come to the end of our lesson today, we have looked at different different ideas. We have looked at the periods in history. We have looked at the branches in history. We have looked at, finally, we have looked at the arms and forms of government. And I'm sure, my dear learner, you have learned something. So, to help you continue revising and tackling this topic, I want you to answer these brief questions. So, your revision question for today. Your revision question for today. So, I'm giving you two questions. Number one, identify the periods in history. And then, number two, name the three arms of government. Name the three arms of government. And my dear learner, I'm sure from what we have learned today, those questions you are able to answer to satisfaction. So, my dear learner, we have come to the end of our lesson today. Until our next lesson, it's bye-bye for now.